Greetings, interweb. It's Mick the Old Punk. It's Saturday, November the 11th. No, Saturday, November the 9th. Just got back from taking the dog out for a hike. Feel good about that. My ankle's stronger. It's still a little bit swollen, but I was able to handle a bit more terrain than before, so that's good news. As you can see, he's passed out over on the couch back here, so he might jump up at some point once he gets a second lease of life, because his treat is on the floor, but he's just too pooped to eat it. It's good to have problems like that, right? You know. So anyway, I've been wondering about what to talk about today, and I've decided today's video is going to be about control, specifically control in relation to trauma survivors. There's control is a very big thing, right? Control is a very big, all-encompassing subject, put it that way. You can be a control freak. You could like control in certain areas. You could be not interested in any kind of control whatsoever. And whatever kind of control you tend to use in your day-to-day life, be it habitual, be it mandatory, necessary, even optional, I guess, it overlaps even with people who've had trauma. If you had asked me if I was a controlling person, if I was a control freak, I would just laugh. There's no way that I'm a control freak. In fact, I take pride in the fact that I'm really laid back, and very little ruffles my feathers, as they say. Very little bothers me. If I get into a debate or even an argument with people, I don't need to be right. You know, when I was younger, I did, but as I get older, that's changed. But that's just one element of control. There's a whole other angle of control that I, as a trauma survivor, am a little bit of a control freak, and I didn't realize that was the case. And if you take the trauma out of it, it seems that entrepreneurs like myself also have a tendency to be control freaks. You see where this is going, right? So, I've been self-sabotaging myself and my business for years. And the trauma's part of that, and there's a litany of other possible issues, or possible culprits, I should say. But control is a big one. And curiously enough, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I had a speaker named Dan Martell. You know, look him up if you're into entrepreneurship. He's really good. And he was telling his story, and his backstory, while quite different to my backstory, had a lot of similarities and overlaps, including being homeless at a young age and addictions and what have you, right? So when he started speaking about this stuff, it started making sense. And I'd heard years ago, right, that doing low-value tasks is not the right way to make money. So, for instance, let's say it takes 2 hours to cut the grass. In my situation here, from start to finish, right? And let's say I pay a company 40, 50 bucks a week or whatever, and they cut the grass. They do it in 20 minutes, right? Because it's a team of people with great equipment and yada yada. Plus, they don't hate it. I hate cutting the grass. So let's just, for sake of argument, we'll call it 50 bucks for 1 hour. And it takes me, say, 2 hours because, I have to do all the stuff individually and what have you, and then get gasoline for the equipment. So 25 bucks an hour if is what I'm saving. If you're not busy, it makes sense. If you're an entrepreneur, it doesn't make sense. Because the logic is, I could be using those 2 hours at a much higher per hour value task. Even if I'm not busy with the business at the moment, or even if I'm just choosing not to do something, it's putting that habit in place. So this is this one particular item that I've given control up on, and I don't want to do it, and I don't want to worry about cutting the grass or it not being done, especially when it's really hot outside. And the first year that I paid for a company to cut my grass, I felt extremely guilty. I felt a ton of shame. You might be, why, right? Well, because I'm fully able. I can do it myself. All my friends, they cut their own grass, or they do home repairs. But the one thing they all have in common, not a one of them is self-employed, with the exception of one person who is a bloody hard worker and has a wife with a never-ending honeydew list, and that's about the nicest way I can put that. And he works all hours. He's effectively created a job for himself, and as Dan Martell puts it in his book, which I suggest if you're an entrepreneur you read, is Buy Back Your Time. In his book, he suggests any entrepreneur that doesn't grow and that creates a job for themselves is working for a lunatic. And essentially that's true, right? Because to be a successful entrepreneur, you've got to thrive in chaos. And that's why, besides the fear factor of doing this yourself, a lot of people can't deal with the chaos that comes with running your own business. And ironically, for reading his book, turns out the vast majority of entrepreneurs had a hectic childhood, and so they're able to deal with that. And I never connected the dots, right? Because I could lose a client, I could have a project go bad, I could have somebody want to interview me. You don't know where the next thing's coming from, but every particular email or phone call that comes in could send you off in a different direction. And there's chaos. What happens if you run out of money? What happens if clients aren't paying you? There's all these different things, and you've got to get your marketing up to speed. You've got to get new clients, and one of your clients is being sold or going out of business. There's all these different things. It's not for the faint of heart, right? But in some ways, perhaps I'm uniquely qualified for that because of the crap I went through when I was young. So getting back to cutting the grass, the first year I felt incredibly guilty, and I wasn't happy with the job that this individual was doing. So I canceled it, and I went back to cutting the grass myself, and I hated it more than ever before because I'd had a taste. It's like a drug, right? I'd had a taste of not doing it myself. And so the next year, I called a different company, a more professional company, and they send a crew out of 2 or 3 people, and so they get it done in 20 minutes. And they do a far superior job to the other guy and a superior job to what I did. And they charge like $50 a week 45, 50, I don't remember what it is. It's not a lot of money. So for the first, I don't know, month or two that this happened, I started feeling an element of guilt. But then that slowly disappeared. And then when we got the really hot and humid weather, and I'm looking at these poor guys out there sweating their asses off, and I'm sitting in my air conditioning, hopefully working, but even if I'm not, that's okay. Yeah, that's an area that it was difficult to relinquish control. But short of a catastrophic failure in my business, I'll never cut grass again. I like not having to do that. I no longer feel guilty about it. I certainly don't feel shame about it. Rather, I'm doing what every successful entrepreneur does. I'm buying back my time. And that's just one small example of this, right? There's got to be more that I've yet to do, and there's many more that I've done already within the business without realizing that's what I was doing, and I was feeling guilty for about my lack of effort because I'd outsourced this portion, I'd outsourced that portion, I'd outsourced this portion, but all the other cyber companies and IT companies, they're not doing that, keeping it in-house, and I could never understand. And they're working 12, 16, 18-hour days, which I used to. Now I can have days where I'm working 3 or 4 hours because a lot of the manual stuff I've outsourced. Oh. And then when you start looking at it like that, it's like entrepreneurs have control issues. Trauma survivors have control issues. But the one thing that big self-made entrepreneurs learn is acquiescing control. And so I've got a lot of thinking to do. I've got a lot of areas to change. And thankfully that book has a bunch of handouts and exercises to do so I can start doing this. And dare I say that, bumping into this Dan Martell, it's very early and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think meeting him might just be the part that was missing for me to get the business to the next level, because I'm now already thinking of things in a way that I haven't in the past. So he was stressing that the single biggest thing he did for himself to get to the next level was hiring a personal assistant. And instantly, like, oh, that means I've got to give up control of this, got control of that, and I've got to pay money for this, and rinse and repeat, right? So when he starts breaking it down, and, kind of like what I broke down a few minutes ago about cutting the grass, when you start breaking it down like that, like, if I am not being constantly distracted by this or by that, then I can focus on the business at hand, focus on what can grow the business, focus on what can make me money, focus on what can give me financial freedom. All of a sudden, like, it's coming down to control, isn't it? So I have to be honest with myself. I have to compile a list of every aspect of my business and then break it down into categories of, does it make me money, does it cost me money, and everything in between, right? And then work on a plan to start outsourcing a bit here and a bit there. And I've already done some of this. I'm already a little bit ahead of the game in that regard. And I've been in talks with a fellow IT colleague who has hired virtual help in other countries. And you know what? That's a good way to start this off. So that's the angle I'm going to start looking at. So control is a funny thing, right? As a trauma survivor, control is a safety mechanism. As an entrepreneur, control is ego driven. No one can do it as good as me. No one can do it better than me. No one can give the client the same representation I can. And that's just hogwash, right? Because no one's going to care about my business to the way I am. No one's going to sell my business the way I do. But everything else, and even the selling with the right trainer, I could teach them, methods and boundaries to sell the way I want them to sell. But everything else, that's hubris on my part to think somebody else can't do it as well as I can. And to make matters worse, a few years ago, I polled a couple of my longer standing clients and said, hey, I'd like to grow the business. How would you feel if I hire somebody, call him Fred, and say Fred comes out to fix your computers or install some security software or whatever? How would you feel about that? And their response was either we just want our shit fixed so we don't care, and if you're endorsing them and you're managing them, we don't care. So I've got all these green lights, so why am I not moving forward? I'm going to leave that like a cliffhanger. See if anyone actually watches this till the end, and we'll do kind of a part 2, if you will, in the next one. Alright guys, I hope you're having a good day. Be good to yourself.